All right, we'll call to order the Planning Commission meeting of Thursday, August 21st, 2025. If we can have roll call, please.
Chair Dennison.
Here.
Vice Chair Simcock.
Here.
Commissioner Yu.
Here.
Commissioner Moran. Commissioner Brennan asked to be excused for this meeting.
Great, thank you. I would seek approval of the agenda with a change to moving item 3, approval of the minutes, to item new 6 after the public hearing.
That moves. Go ahead.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up is the council liaison report.
Just in time.
Good evening, Planning Commission, and thank you so much for having us here tonight. We have nothing to report. We have been closed and dark for the last month, so I have nothing to report out.
Great, thank you. Next up, we'll take community input. At this time, any person may address the Planning Commission concerning an item that is not on the agenda. The Commission welcomes your attendance and participation. When addressing the Commission, please begin by providing your name and address for the record. Please keep comments to no more than 3 minutes to assure an orderly and timely meeting. Hearing no comments and acknowledging for the record Commissioner Moran's arrival, we will go ahead and move into Municipal Code Texts, a public hearing. Municipal Code Text Amendment, MCTA 25-02, amending Section 17.60.056, discretionary demolition permit of Chapter 17.60, variances and discretionary permits of Title 17, zoning of the Sierra Madre Municipal Code. Does staff have a presentation for us?
Yes, Chair. Our Senior Planner Wolf will deliver the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lynn, and good evening, Chair Dennison and the Planning Commission. Tonight we have a public hearing for Municipal Code Text Amendment 25-02 for updates of the discretionary demolition permit ordinance. This hearing was continued from the August 7th Planning Commission meeting. I also want to note that the City Attorney had reviewed the ordinance that was drafted by the subcommittee and then revised through the Planning Commission's review on August 7th and had made significant changes. I'd like to turn it over to the City Attorney now. He'd like to say something about that too.
I just wanted to clarify what the nature of the edits were. First, because... Thank you so much, Chair. So I want to clarify what the nature of the edits were. So first being, this was a pretty dense ordinance, and it was fairly wordy. So every opportunity I had, I tried to substitute fewer words where I thought there were too many. So that was the first edit's kind of cosmetic. There were a lot of cross references to different sections, so I just made sure the section references were consistent. Because you had one section say subdivision B, another one listed out the entire section, another one listed out the title of the section. I just made sure they're all consistent section references. We had the fire marshal review this ordinance, and we added some language in there with the fire marshals, with our local fire marshal's approval, to make sure that we're able to avail ourselves of the latest state fire marshal guidelines when it comes to using different materials. For development. There was some confusion, I thought, in the way the ordinance was drafted between exemptions and exceptions. And let me talk about the difference real quick. The exemptions come at the beginning of the ordinance, and they exempt you from the process. So you don't have to apply for a discretionary demolition permit if you're exempt. But if you're not exempt, you have to go through the discretionary demolition permit. And then in the findings, we'll figure out whether or not there's some exception that applies that's going to get you out of having to get the Planning Commission out or the Director of Planning out from having to make the rest of the findings. I wanted to make sure that so back to that point, I thought some exemptions were listed as exceptions, some exceptions were listed as exemptions. Hopefully we can clarify that when you have an opportunity to review the ordinance. With Senior Planner Wolf, we went through each paragraph and each finding, and we asked ourselves, does it make sense? What purpose does it serve? Because so often it's the case with a lot of these ordinances that they get passed down and we don't give any thought to why does this language exist in the first place? What purpose does it serve? What is its function? So we justified each section, we justified each finding, and whatever's left is, at least those sections that are left are the ones that we were able to justify among ourselves. And lastly, we made sure that it's synced up well with other sections of the code so that there weren't inconsistencies between this section and other sections of the code. So having said that, I'll turn it back over to Senior Planner Wolf to go through what some of those edits are.
Thank you, City Attorney. I just want to mention too that this presentation is going to cover some basic concepts that you've already heard about. And at the end, we'll provide the recommendations of staff and the alternatives available to the Planning Commission, and then roll right over into the draft amendments. So at the conclusion of the August 7th meeting, staff mentioned that Planning Commission would be receiving an exhibit to be incorporated by reference through the resolution of City Council. In the review with Sierra Madre Fire Chief, Fire Marshal, and City Attorney, it was determined to be a best practice to refer to a handbook listing building materials approved for use in the wildland urban interface that is published and updated by the State Fire Marshal. The handbook is available online and can be accessed by scanning the QR code on screen. The handbook is not particularly user-friendly for the everyday homeowner, but it does provide very useful information, such as who to contact to inquire about specific materials. Staff will be working on a complementary guidance document that bridges the everyday homeowner with this handbook and the intent of the discretionary demolition permit ordinance to appropriately match historical building materials.
And if I could chime in here, the alternative we were thinking about was adopting a resolution. But the problem with adopting a resolution that's adopted by the City Council is that's a pretty static document, meaning every time we need to amend that, it needs to go to the City Council for amendment. And we thought it makes more sense if we give staff, specifically the Fire Marshal, the flexibility to amend that as necessary as things change. So as the State Fire Marshal changes something, our local Fire Marshal can change something. That was the rationale behind taking out of the resolution process and placing a reference to an external document directly in the ordinance.
So in turn, we update the fire hardening update definition to add that sentence as mentioned. I'll go over more in depth what exemptions and exceptions there are. And here the idea is that exemptions can be determined objectively and for the most part immediately upon review of any proposed demolition. Exceptions, on the other hand, may require the applicant to provide photographs of the areas of the structure to be demolished, or require that staff conduct a site observation or research permitting records before making any determination. So the exemptions process is going to exist under subsection C, which was applicability review, now being renamed to pre-application review, which establishes a process where applicants meet with a planner to first determine whether the demolition first relates to a preservation candidate, secondly, qualifies for a certificate of economic hardship, or third, is exempt from a discretionary demolition permit under the criteria that are listed thereunder. Exceptions are going to live under subsection G, where they had been, and they establish the work that is not subject to a discretionary demolition permit.
And if I could add also here, at the exemption phase, pre-application, application hasn't been submitted. Staff's looking over this application. Ministerially, without applying any kind of discretion, staff should be able to tell, based on the types of exemptions we've identified, it is or it isn't subject to it. Discretion happens at the exception level after an application's been submitted, and exception and discretion should not be exercised by staff at the pre-application level. It should be exercised by the decision makers, planning commission or the director, once the application's been submitted. So if you can get that distinction, exemptions, no discretion. It should be just ministerial objective. Exceptions, you're gonna have to exercise some discretion to determine whether or not this exception applies.
So exemptions include demolition that is not visible from public view, demolition that is limited to the interior walls, and other items that had been in exceptions under the previous forms of this ordinance. The odd case is for exemptions in the last one where determination is based on the results of a written historic assessment. So in that case, if there isn't already a written historic assessment for a structure, the applicant will be asked to go get a historic resource evaluation report. We'll go over what that is. That's just a definition attributed to a written historic report or assessment. But that's going to be done by the city's consulting services, and based on its result, and if the replacement development project is a use by right, then an exemption can be provided for the work that's proposed. And exceptions, on the other hand, and as the city attorney explained, are more of a discretionary action. And that would be where staff determines, for example, where replacement of certain building elements are in character and in kind to the existing structure. That doesn't have to do with fire hardening updates. That's going to be an exemption, not an exception. Other exceptions include the demolition of on a parcel that was developed as part of a subdivision, creating 5 or more residential units, or where the city engineer or building official determines an imminent hazard to public health or safety, demolition that only affects well-documented additions or alterations that are not original to a structure, or demolition of a structure that is plainly not an architectural specimen. So
When do you want to discuss questions about this?
why don't we get into questions once we go over the actual municipal code text? So we'll roll right into that after this.
Okay.
And just to briefly touch on the certificate of economic hardship, we streamline this even further so that it's not going to be even a planning commission or city council decision. It's going to be a director's level decision. Granting certificates of economic hardship require that an applicant demonstrate how the replacement material is disproportionate to the value of the property. And that would be kind of a determination based on the cost of stabilizing the building elements compared to the appraisal value of the property. Just want to point out here too that the Planning Commission and City Council will continue to retain authority of certificates of economic hardship which are related to designated landmarks.
So in this change, we were asking ourselves, okay, so the applicant is saying they don't have the funds to go through this process. It's too expensive. Currently, as written, the process says you don't have the funds. Well, you have to undertake this other expensive process to determine whether or not you have the funds to actually go through the initial process. It
Seems fair, yeah.
It didn't really make sense to have this protracted process for it. There should be a quick, easy way to say, all right, you're claiming you don't have the funds, we're going to apply a test. And if you pass the test, then you don't have to, you're going to be exempt. If you can't pass the test, then you got to go through it because you obviously have enough funds, according to us, that this is going to apply to you. So that's why we did it at the staff level, and we're going to talk with you all, explore what that test should look like. But we were contemplating doing it at the staff level instead of having a planning commission hearing regarding whether or not someone has the funds to apply for a permit.
How many economic hardship certificates have you given out since you've been here?
Chair Dennison, none.
Thank you.
And I just wonder.
Maybe that's because it's too expensive.
Well, I was wondering whether it's the process. If someone is told to apply for an economic hardship you have to go to the planning commission for approval. It sounds
We'll find out.
daunting, but yeah, that was our rationale.
Well, depends what the test is, I guess.
It also sounds like maybe it's a little embarrassing. Like, I didn't have enough money. I want to show it off to you.
The current draft also revises some of the findings, and some of the processes revised in that so that the director is going to be making these findings rather than the burden of proof being on the applicant. This would allow for the department to communicate feedback related to required findings prior to making any decisions so that the applicant has the ability to revise their application in a way that would make findings. and some findings have been updated. So the new one, which is going to be number 1, would be that no exemptions or exceptions apply. We've revised the initial first finding. It's just a simplification. We've also revised finding number 3, that the demolition is necessary to accommodate a replacement development project rather than a more generic use of language, which is just a necessity. And then we removed a finding that was for the public interest, convenience, and necessity related to the location of the demolition, which we didn't understand why that language was there in the first place.
And to add further to this one, before it was written, here's how it was written. The applicant had the burden of proof to demonstrate X, Y, and Z. And generally speaking, I think that's not a good way to write these types of ordinances, because when you're issuing a permit, it's always the decision maker that has to prove whether X, Y, Z findings are satisfied. And then if they're not, then you deny based on those findings. So while it's written that the applicant has a burden of proof to demonstrate it, in actuality, in practice, it's the decision makers that are determining whether or not those findings are made. So we reworded it really.
That's a basic cover of the concepts. The Planning Commission's alternatives tonight are to approve the Municipal Code text amendment per Resolution 25-12, which is a recommendation that the City Council adopt the ordinance that amends Section 17.60.056 of the Municipal Code. Planning Commission could also approve this with modifications, indicating what modifications those might be, or they can continue consideration of the Municipal Code text amendment, providing direction to staff. Staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission approve the Municipal Code text amendment per Resolution 25-12. For anyone following along, we're going to have the discretionary demolition permit code text available by scanning the QR code you see on screen. So I'll give a second for people at home to scan that. It's going to cover all the new sections, starting with the first one, purpose, then definitions, then pre-application review, which was applicability review, then application process, a public noticing and comment section, a review and approval process, an exceptions section, a certificate of economic hardship section, a finding section, and an appeal section.
Another point to add here, when we were drafting this, we wanted to make sure that it's sequential, meaning purpose and definition is always at the beginning, but then starting at pre-application, it's basically going to be the process. Pre-application, application, notice, review. Probably the only thing that's out of order, I would say, is maybe the certificate of economic hardship, because we're making that determination up there near pre-application review. But the rest of it is intended to be sequential.
So before questions, I'd like to just skim over the code text. I'll get that shared up on screen right now.
So mine is a concept, not actual code.
Okay.
And so you said that the fire hardening has become an exemption.
Fire hardening has become an exemption.
So the way that we had designed the code was so that we could review what those proposed changes were, so that somebody who has a historic building and wants to fire harden it doesn't go from shake siding to stucco, which, if it's an exemption, help me understand how we have purview over what that is. An exemption to me implies, hey, I'm going to fire harden. Okay, go ahead.
Right. So you wouldn't have, if you want to keep the Planning Commission's purview over fire hardening, you have to move it back into exception. The rationale we had, and by the way, I wasn't at the committee meeting, so I don't know internally what you had discussed. But the way I was thinking about it when we were making the edits was, we have a list of approved material, and so planning staff was going to determine whether or not their proposed changes to that historic structure are using the proposed material. And if they were, then they were going to be okay. But if it's Planning Commission's decision to have some kind of review over whether or not the material in the handbook that the fire marshal provides is appropriate for that historic development, then I agree, you should move it back into exceptions.
Yeah, it wasn't the planning commission. We don't think people should have to come before us in front of a meeting. It was a ministerial review at the staff level, so that and I'll go through the whole story before
Okay.
your questions. The idea being, if you have horizontal siding and and it's wood shake, and you replace it with a cementitious wallboard type siding, that it's of similar ilk. Whereas if you proposed stucco on a historical home, which is a fire hardened material, that wouldn't be a like for like, and it would not preserve the historical nature. The idea was to try to get people through as quickly as possible, which was a request from the city council, and as easily as possible, but still try to find some middle ground where we're maintaining the historical look, right? So if that beautiful house on Orange Grove, or on the boulevard that we saw before that has orange groves leading up to it, said, I want to apply for hardening, and they had an exemption, they could take all that beautiful siding off and put stucco all the way around it. And I don't think that's what the city council is after. I think they're after a fast-tracked process with just the slightest little overview to say, yes, you're replacing like for like. And so that was why we went with the exemption route. I'm sorry, the exception route, pursuant or subject to an exhibit that staff would create, so that it didn't have to be approved by council, because I love that part of it, right? And so it could be updated from time to time by Planning and Preservation Department.
I hear that. So in light of that, I wonder, would the concern be addressed if, as part of that exemption for fire hardening, there were guidelines provided, as staff said they're going to provide, that explain what constitutes like for like? Meaning, if they, in that pre-application review, if they're told that this application is going to come in and what they're proposing to do, and then staff refers to this guideline and says, well, what you're proposing isn't a like for like, unfortunately, you're going to have to apply for a discretionary demolition permit. Would that satisfy it? Or do you think we need some intermediary approach, which is kind of like what I'm understanding from you, where it's not an exemption and it's not a planning commission level determination that there's an exception, but some kind of intermediate level?
I think that question is for you.
Mm-hmm.
When I hear the word exemption, I don't hear it being subject to terms.
Mm-hmm.
I hear, I'm going to do fire hardening, because it was even listed in the no discretion side.
Right.
So if you're saying that we can insist upon previewing the materials and approving that they qualify for an exemption based on the materials and the like for like exchange, that's fine. But the way you described it with subjectivity, not subjectivity, but discretion, the way you described it, it didn't fit over there. And so if you're saying that you're comfortable that nobody's going to come and say discretion be darned because it's an exemption, then I'm fine with it being there. That was my concern, the way that they were categorized.
Understood. And I want to think through.
You want me to answer one of those questions?
Sure. I have a comment, follow-up comment.
Speaking for council that night when we were discussing this subject was, one, yes, like for like products that look exactly like the traditional historical value, but still are fire hardened. But the other part of that was also that with the fire hardening, we, especially Mayor Parkhurst, really expressed too that it'd be better to have a house left than have a historical valued house burned. So one of the exceptions that he really valued was not creating barriers for people to not harden their home. And it wasn't just the fact of keeping it like for like, it was also the fact that, well, you still have a home versus you don't have a home because you can't harden it because there's nothing like that. That was one of his express.
My question was going to be for the group, because I'm not an expert in this, and this might be a question for planning staff. Is it possible to draft a guideline internally that would allow you to make a determination pre-application review whether a project is going to be a like-for-like replacement? Or do you think it's going to be something where you'll still have that guideline, but you think you're gonna have to exercise significant discretion in determining whether or not it's a like for like.
I think there might be instances where both apply, or one or the other can apply. Director Lynn, do you have?
Yeah, so I think in the guideline, we might able to solve that problem if it's something that's obvious. And if something that's beyond, like enlarging a window that's beyond that was intended for, then we always have that option to elevate it back to the discretionary portion of it.
But there's always going to be discretion. It's either going to be your discretion or their discretion. And I'd rather not have their discretion. Because, again, like, a nice old craftsman house with now, vertical cementatious siding on it is not the same. But they could say, well, no, it's the same, it's siding. We just put different siding on it. So somebody's making the discretion. And to have all those rules written out, like, that even makes it harder, I think. So I think they propose, I would still want them to propose, show us what they're doing and keep the discretion with a very few number of people instead of everybody in town.
I think he was asking a slightly different question.
Oh,
I think he was asking if the majority of the time it would be kind of a back and forth with the applicant versus here's the scale, it's pretty black
But
and white.
if it's an exemption, then it's exempted, there's no discretion. That's why I don't like
Well, you
it
might be
being an
able to
exemption.
list like exemption as long as it meets these
Well, that's
objective
that's
criteria.
discretion,
So it's the question of.
because the criteria is,
Well, if it was objective criteria, it's not.
it's not, it can't be.
Well, that was the question.
But it can't be objective criteria
So that
because
is
you're
the answer
replacing
then.
something that is not like for like. You're replacing something that is wood with concrete.
In,
So, I mean,
in my mind, when we were talking about this, the way I had understood it is, there's gonna be a chart, example, and it says, here's wood material, and if you're gonna replace wood with any of these things, any of these other materials, you're good to go. That's not something that requires a lot of discretion. That's something easy to do at the exemption level, where you see, okay, existing in wood, they want to replace it with X. We check the chart. It's not on the chart. Sorry, you got to apply for a discretionary demolition permit. That's how I envision this process. But if this process works out differently, then we should change that.
So his question was whether we could construct such a table, and I think your answer is no.
my answer is no.
Well, I mean, it's not us constructing the table, right? It's staff. So
Yeah. But like whether one could construct such a table.
I don't think a table can be constructed that would do that because there's still discretion.
But I think that the final discretion would come down to staff.
Not if
And-
it's an exemption.
Right, but with this chart, I think we're trying to capture like 90% of the stuff, right?
Well, then the
And then
10% goes
is
through.
with the
Yeah, then
stuff
it
that
goes
they would-
through to
yeah.
the next
10%
level.
falls through.
And are we okay with that? I mean, that's the question, right?
No, it's if it's in that chart, then you get the exemption. If it's not in that chart, then you go to the exception level. That was my understanding. So the 10% doesn't fall through, it goes to the review.
Discretionary demolition permit.
right.
What we have in place, right?
Yeah.
So,
If you don't make the cut at the exemption, if you're not on the chart, if your materials are not contemplated on the chart,
right.
you're gonna have to go through the discretionary
The
demolition.
idea right now is that 100% of the time you have to go through that process.
Correct.
Trying to create a way so that 70, 80, 90% of it, we can at least let them flow easier, and that 10% still falls with that, what we already have.
And I imagine, I don't know, I'm an attorney, not a planner, but I imagine the planners would have a sense of what the appropriate building materials are. So if someone proposes a building material that's kind of unusual, they're gonna tell them, either you're gonna change your building material to be one of these on the list, or you're gonna have to go through discretionary review because it's not on our list.
If I have an exemption, why do I even have to come here?
The
Oh,
process
okay.
contemplates you, before, if you have a house that's 75 years old,
Right.
this process contemplates you coming to the counter and engaging staff
Even
before.
if I meet an exemption.
Yes, because the way it's written, you'll see, he'll go
Okay.
through it, but it's, the term you use is, what's the term for those homes? It's a preservation
Preservation
candidate requiring pre-application review if you're 75 years or older.
And if I may add, the concern that staff has in having a guidance document is that there isn't like a catch-all for certain maybe exotic materials such as a combustible scalloped siding where there isn't, something approved by the state fire marshal. And so without any guidance and without an approved material, someone would have to come up with their own custom material or be subject to the discretionary demolition permit for a different siding altogether.
Which speaks in favor of the discretionary side rather than the exemption side.
Either way, it's a request to remove a potentially historic siding.
And again, one of the reasons we kept this as a staff level document so that it can be continuously updated.
Yeah.
But once it's updated, it should be consistently applied is the idea, yeah.
It sounds to me like maybe a table wouldn't catch like as much as like 70-80%, so maybe we should just go.
Well, there's going to be a table regardless. It's whether or not it gets applied as an exemption or as an exception. There'll be some kind of chart that says, do this, not that.
I think there's still discretion almost every time. So I just don't see why it would be an exemption.
Okay.
Because that's just my thought. Because say we come to that point where we have a scallop thing.
Why don't we
know.
look at the code and then
Okay.
we'll do the
Yeah,
deliberation
let's do that.
afterwards.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, to start with the subsection A, purpose, that remained the same except that it removed, our current version removes the last sentence that was added by the subcommittee. Definitions have been updated. I've already gone over the change for the fire hardening update. We add historic resource evaluation report, which is just the same language for historic assessments. It just captures it here and makes the rest of the text shorter. Preservation candidate, there have been 2 changes to this, so let me just read it as it is. Preservation candidate means a structure which was constructed 75 years or more prior to the date of the application for review, and this is new, or is of a distinguished architectural style as determined by the director. And that's meant to capture anything such as mid-century modern, which might not be 75 years old yet, but is a distinguished style. And then the last part of this rolls in what we had as a definition for construction date into the definition for preservation candidate, simply because there was no other use of the term construction date elsewhere in the ordinance, and it made sense to just combine it all in one.
So, how do you determine, so if I don't have a house of 75 years of age, then I don't have to apply for a discretionary demolition permit. So I don't understand how it is that the distinguishing, where is it? Oh, there it is. The distinguished architectural style has anything to do with this.
So it's going to be applied through the pre-application review, and this is when someone submits an application for review, such as a building permit. And let's say it's a building permit for a home that's only 40 years old. We look at that and we say, is it a preservation candidate? Because it might be a distinguished style that we want to have preserved rather than have altered beyond recognition.
So every house that comes in for a demolition permit is going to be a preservation candidate?
Screened for.
Screen for, yes. So I'll go over that more in the pre-application review.
And directors, by no means are we advocating for this, anything drafted here. All we're doing is trying to explain to you our rationale for having drafted some
Yeah.
of these things.
Because demolition permit's a different code,
Correct,
and you only come over here if you're 75 years or older,
correct.
I feel like that won't apply to anything. That's what I'm trying to understand, if that actually has any teeth in it, being the distinguished architectural style.
And that's a good question for planning staff. If someone's going to apply at the building counter for a demolition permit, which is essentially a building permit, post entitlement usually, how would you stop them there and say, no, you have to go through this process because we've identified that it's in distinguished architectural style?
That would be correct.
But that's not written into the demolition permit process.
So if we move on to subsection C, pre-application review. So prior to submitting an application, the prospective applicant shall meet with the department for staff to determine whether the proposed demolition relates to a preservation candidate. So I'll stop there. So we have to first determine whether it relates to a preservation candidate. Going back to that definition, there's two ways to relate to a preservation candidate. One, it's 75 years or older, or we find that it is a distinguished architectural style that is not quite 75 years old.
But
I understand your point.
you understand my point?
Yeah, it is. I also have my reservations for different reasons, mostly about giving this kind of discretion to staff to determine whether or not an application should come in for a permit. But I think the chair raises a good point about how the trigger here is, on the one hand, is clear, 75 years, but the second trigger is discretionary. So how would an applicant know that their home is of a distinguished architectural style subject to this ordinance without actually coming in and finding that out after the fact? Because anyone can look at this code and say, okay, my house is subject to discretionary demolition permit because it's over 75 years old. But no one would know whether the house is subject to discretionary demolition permit based on that second criterion.
Right, unless it's predetermined already
Unless
throughout
it's,
the whole.
unless it's predetermined. Correct.
Yeah, so at the planning process, when someone proposes a demolition and it's more than 50% or 75% of the remodel area, those triggers demolition. And then at that point, staff, it requires staff review. But I do understand that there is that something that's less than 50%, they will not be catched.
So if I demolish 49% of my mid-century modern house today,
They get a
it would
ranch
never be
house.
reviewed. That was my concern with this.
So what I'm understanding is that when the phrase "an application for review" is used in this ordinance, it means any application. So that can be a building permit, not necessarily a demolition permit.
And if that is the understanding, we should clarify that. If that's what the planning commission wants to do, we should clarify that.
The reason I think it's generic is because building permit can pertain to 49% or less demolition area, whereas demolition is only for 50% or more. But I understand what the confusion could be. We're not going to exercise this ordinance if someone's just doing a plumbing repair and it involves something on the exterior and it's related only to utilities.
And my concern was, again, slightly different. My concern was about notice to the members of the public.
All right, I guess we'll come back to it.
Okay. So moving on, whether the demolition relates to a preservation candidate. Second, if it qualifies for a certificate of economic hardship in accordance with section 17.60.056H, or is exempt from discretionary demolition permit under any of the following. So the first one is moved from exceptions under G1, second one from G2, third one from G5, fourth one from G7. So what you're seeing here too is also a simplification of that language. And the fifth one here, it reads that a demolition where both of the following are true, that the replacement development project is a use by right, meaning it does not require any discretionary approvals, and that a historic resource evaluation report classifies the structure as Code 6, which means that it is ineligible for designation or listing. So this is a synthesis of prior versions, sections which clarify the applicable exemption. And then we have the catch-all here. That existed under exceptions, but it makes more sense to be as an exemption. For the application process, this was revised only to simplify the language. Here you see it being a lot shorter with the use of the historic resource evaluation report term. Public notice and comment remain the same. Review and approval process remain the same, except we incorporate what was an exception under G11, that the director shall have discretion to refer any application to the Planning Commission for review here under F2. And exceptions now are shortened because a lot of that moved to exemptions. And so the first one remains from what was G4, the second one from G6, the third one from G8, the fourth one from G3, and the fifth one from G9. The certificates of economic hardship were covered in the presentation. This is just the way it's codified. And findings, we also went over in the presentation. Here's more of the technical language. And then I did want to note here too that the exceptions for ministerial review were removed. And that's because it allows staff more flexibility to determine where exceptions or exemptions apply. And then appeals remain the same. That concludes the presentation. I do want to mention too that staff received one public comment, which was forwarded to the Planning Commission for their consideration.
Any questions for staff? All right. At this time, any person may address the Planning Commission concerning an item, this specific agendized item. The Commission welcomes your attendance and participation. When addressing the Commission, please begin by providing your name and address for the record. Please keep comments to no more than 3 minutes to ensure an orderly and timely meeting. Seeing no public comment, we'll bring it back for deliberation. Who would like to start? I guess I would recommend that we start talking about whether we want the exemption or exception, because that's really going to change. I don't know that there were a ton of edits proposed outside of just that fundamental exemption versus exemption.
Yeah, that, and then kind of the 40-year kind of architectural, distinct architectural style question versus the 75.
Would you like to start?
But
No?
particularly.
Anybody else? Commissioner Simcock?
Sure. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what we were talking about. I'm trying to figure out how we catch this distinguished architectural style.
Well, I mean, we can recommend, I guess, practically, somebody has to come to the counter no matter what, right? And so if we were to add that any application would be reviewed subject to this code, then you would be able to catch them. We're just trying to close a hole for the 49% that don't have to get an in-depth review, right?
But question for you guys, what information do you need to determine whether something is of a distinguished architectural style? Is that a photograph of the home and you're like, yes or no? Or is that a lot of information? Because if that's a lot of information, then a lot of people will be subject to a lot more additional administrative work because of this.
Yeah, so at the public counter, they usually show us, if a building permit is going to be pulled, they usually show us the building materials and then what is the existing condition of the house. So they bring photographs to the counter, and at that point, we might able to check against to see if it's an architectural style that needs to be preserved or of a distinguishment. We also partner with National Park Services, and they did the reconnaissance survey for the entire city, and hopefully that data, after they clean it up and then organize it, that will come back to the city, and that would be a piece of reference that we can reference with if they identify certain properties that have or could be a potential preservation candidate.
And the question is that enough information, or do you feel like you would need more?
I can answer the question. From what I have gathered from the interviews with the National Park Service team is that the output from the survey will detail and identify what the architectural style, or won't identify any style at all for each building that was within their scope of survey. And that's going to cover every building that was constructed prior to 1970. That doesn't already actually have a historic report.
So that information will be enough then?
That may be enough. We don't know what the outcome is yet. What we know is that it's going to result with an identification of the architectural style if one exists.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to get at here is whether this would mean that because you have to determine it for any application that comes through, whether then every application that comes through needs all this additional data to provide you to figure out whether it is, a distinct architectural style or not, which seems like it makes a lot more work for both you and the applicants.
Yeah, because what we don't want to do is minor remodels, because if we add this into the code, have to come before you, and somebody has to go back and take a bunch of pictures, and I can't really tell, let's go do a drive-by. We don't want that, right? We want an efficient process. So is the juice worth the squeeze on this one?
So can we walk through maybe some scenarios of when we apply this, right?
Sure.
So if I own a home and I'm worried about my house and there's a lot of wood in my house, I want to take a look at it and see if it's worth for me. Do I have the funds to do it? That kind of stuff. So I'm going to come to you. I'll give you my address. You might look up, and maybe you look it up on Google Street View or something. And at that point, are you able to make at least a determination of, oh, I think you're okay, you meet it, you can proceed, or, hold on, I think we're gonna have to look into this a little bit more. Because that's, I think, what we want to know, right? Because we don't want them to come to you and then you're like, I don't know, you're gonna have to now do these 10 other things, right? And then, okay, now they go and do this 5 things, and then life gets busy, and then all of a sudden this house never gets upgraded, right? So if they come to the counter and say, all right, this is my house, do you have enough to be able to determine yes or no, or maybe, or, that kind of thing?
So let's say we have no information at the city
Right.
hall of any city records.
Right.
Sometimes we're resourceful and we won't just search Google Street View for what the property looks like, but we might see an MLS listing and its description might identify an architect.
Okay.
And it might identify a style. And at that point we'd say, okay, let's look further into it.
Right. But anything short of sort of that, just the pure look of a house or a building, would that trigger something?
Not necessarily. We've seen a lot of, through our experience in seeing over 200 historic reports that have come through with us, we've seen what looks like it could be significant, be not significant at all.
Okay.
So we won't exercise that type of judgment.
So I mean, scenario, I have a McMansion from 1990 or something. I'm private, so there's no MLS listing, there's no photo on Google Street View. I come in and I guess you're not able to determine whether my McMansion is historic.
I understand the point there. It sounds like we're exercising discretion.
No, I don't think it's discretion. I think we're worried about the applicant having to jump through too many hoops.
Yeah.
which
Like
is what we're trying to
then do you
eliminate,
tell me
right?
to
Yeah.
go back and take photos? What do you do then? Or you do the drive-by? Like there's no photos online, there's no listing. I just tell you it's a McMansion verbally.
At some point, we're going to have to see what the proposed demolition is, and if it's like a roof change and you're going to say, I currently have a rolled asphalt roof and I want a Spanish tile roof, and we'll say, okay, can you provide us some photos of what's already there? And if we can't see it from Google Street View, for example,
And I would need to do that anyway, it sounds like.
well, in the scenario you proposed with it being a 1990 structure, in most cases, no, we're not going to say, look at that and say it requires discretionary demolition permit.
Well, and that's the thing. We're trying to solve for 25 houses that were built in the mid-century modern style, because that's all that's left, right? That's the only style that's left now. There's nothing else there.
So if I can pull back here and reframe what the intent of this language is to actually screen out those post-World War II homes that were Sears catalog homes, for example. And this language says that the preservation candidate would not be one of those if it's because we would determine it to be a distinguished architectural style, which a Sears catalog home and most of those post-World War II tract homes are not. That's the problem we're trying to find a solution for.
A really small percentage of houses.
Right. Yeah, probably, definitely less than 50. But still, that's more than I want to.
Yeah, I mean, my main concern is just making sure it doesn't then make a lot of work for all the vast majority of houses.
Well, the code gets changed from time to time. And so the good news is that we can we can leave it in there for now if we choose, and if it needs to be updated, we can revisit then. If we hear feedback that houses are slipping through, we can err on that side. If we hear feedback that too many hoops to jump through, we can err on that side, right? So I think we should just pick one way or the other, land on it. I'm personally less concerned about trying to solve for these 25 houses
Yes.
versus the overhead that we're going to apply to
Yeah.
applicants. And so
Overall,
I think my recommendation is that we strike that sentence.
That's my recommendation.
That's, yeah.
I can get behind that, yep.
So then that leaves the conversation of discretion versus
Exemption.
exception versus exemption. If the city attorney is comfortable that we can make it an exemption and still have enough criteria with which to determine it's an exception, I'm fine with going that way. I just want to make sure that we're not replacing, and I appreciate the comment about the materials, and I guess that's why we had put it into the discretionary side, right? Because if you say there's no good scalloped cementitious board material, this is fairly close. The other thing is that it can be updated from time to time by planning and preservation. So it can be updated when you find a problem that comes up like this, right? So as long as we have that purview, I think I'm fine with leaving it in an exemption and writing it such that it's tight enough that you err on the side of we've found a good alternative to add and then you're okay, rather than leaving it wide open.
Isn't that more of the exception? Because even at the exception level, they're reviewing it. It doesn't come to us.
So no matter what, it won't come to us.
Yeah,
It was going to be done by staff either way.
Yeah.
So it's just whether or not, and honestly, making an exemption makes it an even faster process. And you always have the ability, staff always has the ability to say, not qualified for an exemption, right?
Yeah, it was just my understanding legally that an exemption had to be like basically completely objective. So basically say like.
Wait, no,
if
that's
it's
exception.
Oh,
right?
sorry.
I'm
No.
getting confused now.
No, exemption.
I want to provide an example. Can we scroll to the discretion, to the exceptions section?
I think.
Yeah, I want to provide an example of what
Yeah,
this
yeah.
looks like in practice. Let's look at number 5. The proposed demolition of the structure does not meet the architectural criterion under section 1782.050. I imagine that requires interpretation. And there's no list there per se. I mean, there is a list under 1782.050, but it's going to require an interpretation of that list, and that list isn't going to be added to.
Okay.
Then I'm fine with
And
that.
then, but the exemption,
But that's an exception.
That's an
Yeah.
exception,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Exemptions,
now if we go to,
Well,
but if we go to an exemption, there will be a list you refer to. And then it's not going to be an interpretation of that. It's going to be, it's not on this list, and staff can determine whether or not something else needs to be added to that list. But if it's added, it's added. And if it's not, it's not. But you're not interpreting material, is the way I see this playing out.
yeah, so
For-
my understanding is that exemption is like, it's either on that list, and if it's not, it goes to the exception route. An exception is like, you could still reference a list and stuff
But-
like that,
but-
but you're exercising
And like,
discretion.
correct. And if you look at number 4, same deal. The proposed demolition only affects a well-documented addition or alteration that are not original to the structure. And so like, you'd have to interpret what a well-documented addition would mean. That's going to require discretion, and that should be left to the decision-making body, not to a counter staff person, I think.
So yeah, my understanding is like exemptions have like very little or no discretion, and exceptions have like a lot more or entirely
That was
discretion.
the intention.
And so the question is, in this case, with this siding stuff, is that something that's like majority not discretion or majority discretion? If it's majority not, then we can probably go exemption, and if there's a catch-all that sends it to the discretion, then that's fine. If it's majority discretion, then it's an exception.
But this list is gonna have stucco as a replacement for wood. Stucco will be on there.
But I think,
Right,
I think
right.
that the list as we had contemplated it would be for shake
Like-
or wood
like for like.
siding, you will replace it with cementitious board type siding, and then it will list the 17
similar
products
dimension or
of similar dimension and, right, and then it would list the 17 products in the fire manual that are that cementitious board-like product. And then if somebody came in and said,
Okay, so
"There's- I
that's-
have scalloped, I don't,
Right.
right? And there's no scalloped replacement, then together they could come up with a replacement and add it to the book, add it to the guide. Because the guide can be updated. It's a living, breathing document.
Okay, so we have our guide, and then the guide references the materials in CAL FIRE book?
My understanding was that, like, if it wasn't in that table, then the catch-all would be, then it just goes to, like, the exception where it's under,
We would do one or the other. We would either do an exemption for fire hardening or an exception. We wouldn't do both. If it didn't qualify under an exemption and it wasn't a material that the planning department decided to add to it, then it would go to the full process.
so it would never go from exemption to exception, is what you're saying.
Not as written.
Yeah. Is
I
that your
guess-
understanding as well, that you couldn't, like, write it such that it went from, if it doesn't qualify for the exemption, if it's not in that table, then it could go to the,
Yeah, I think you guys are saying the same thing, actually. If an application comes in and we determine that an exemption doesn't apply, right, and that we're going to subject them to the process, they go through the process, and then after submitting their application, it's possible that one of these exceptions could apply, maybe. And if they don't, then
Yeah, and I guess what I understood Commissioner Moran to be asking is,
like, whether
so
we would add language
originally,
there.
originally we had the whole process sitting as an exception
Yeah.
so that there could be back and forth dialogue with staff. We've, at the recommendation of city attorney, we're moving it from the exception side to the exemption. So we wouldn't leave it in the exception because
Okay.
it was a ministerial review by staff. So it's going to look very similar. It's just going to happen at the exemption phase.
And one correction, Chair, even though you didn't call it an exemption, it effectively was an exemption because you had a section at the top of the code that said something like, if a project is determined not to be historic, then it doesn't have to go through the discretionary demolition permit process, which effectively, it is an exemption.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a fair point. It's a fair point. Thank you. So does that make more sense?
Yes, yeah.
So it's part of a sequential review of exemptions, right? So there's 4 screening methods here we can use in sequence, right? We have to determine if it's visible from public view. If it is, it's probably not going to be an interior wall, but let's just say that you can see an interior wall from public view. If it's interior only, then it would be exempt. But if it's not, then we determine, is it a landmark? If it is, then no discretionary demolition permit, but there are other processes. Then we look at if it's a fire hardening update. It would be a fire hardening update that is not interior, but that and that you can see from public view. And if it's not, then we look at this section here and we say, okay, so is your replacement development project a use by right? For example, if it's just a siding replacement or if it's a window replacement, then we also need to know if it's eligible for listing as a landmark. That means you need to get a historic resource evaluation report, and with the results of that, we'll see if it's eligible for listing. Then the discretionary demolition permit applies. If it's not, you're exempted.
Yep.
But we're talking about updating the fire hardening section to the like for like.
So she actually brings up a great point. Does the exemption for fire hardening need to be showing that there is a guide, or can the guide be independent and not codified?
The guide would be independent and not codified.
Okay. But it would be published by staff so that people would have access to it.
That's correct.
Okay. I mean, sorry, go ahead, City Attorney.
I was actually going to ask a question to staff just to make sure I understood the process too. All discretionary demolition permits go to I guess the planning director is the person who reviews them first and has the opportunity whether or not to. So if one of these exceptions can't be found, most likely the planning director would send it up to the planning commission for consideration. Okay.
And always has the option to do that.
Always has, right.
Right. If it's the Brady Bunch house, but it got built in '75 after mid-century moderns were built, she could say, hey, I'm referring it to commission.
So just to highlight why the exceptions are of value here, because at the staff level, an application's being reviewed, and only during the applications, after application submission, is the city engineer going to determine there's an imminent threat to health or safety here, right? That's a post-application process. It can't be determined pre-application for as an exemption, I would think. So if one of those are determined, then the director says, okay, you don't have to go through the process anymore, you're out of the process. Or if they're not determined, we're sending it up to a planning commission for review, for the findings to be made.
So then, I mean, and is there any more deliberation on exemption versus exception?
I'm good.
So then I will reiterate one more time that this process works really well for architectural style, but it does not address, oh, actually, never mind, because we changed that to 75 years.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Forget everything I said. We're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
But do we have the proposed, do we need to change language about the fire hardening to reference that guide, or that's?
No, staff will create that guide and just use that as their rubric to determine it. And it'll be changed. It doesn't need to be, the guide does not need to be codified, because it'll be a living, breathing document. They have guidance documents today.
It doesn't need to be referenced in the code. I'm not saying quoted in the code, but it doesn't even need to be said using fire hardening guide, whatever.
It says a list of replacement building materials shall be retained by the department and approved by, so you want the actual, when you say the document needs to be referenced, so there is a document that's referenced. It's a document that's approved by the state fire marshal or Sierra Madre fire marshal. That's what's.
But
That's what's
that
referenced.
has nothing to do with like the like for like stuff.
That will be the like for like stuff.
Okay.
It doesn't specifically call out that the exemption is based on like for like. What
Right.
what it's saying are the materials. So I think what the question is should we add or nuance that definition to be like for like materials that also, and so I think that's
Yeah.
probably where we
I
would
mean,
want to
'cause
add
I
that.
would be super confused as a like a homeowner if I applied for this and all of a sudden there's some like for like, because I'm like, well, this is replacement building materials, but why is this so narrow or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, so maybe after the end of the first sentence of that ends, existing structure, comma, such materials to be of a similar form to existing materials.
But that's only if it's 75 years, right? Now. I don't.
This is for fire hardening only.
Yeah, but if I change my 30-year-old
Then it shouldn't matter. Then
junky
it's just
house,
off the list.
I want to make it stucco, then it doesn't have to be like for like anymore, right?
It's also not fire hardening, and it's also not eligible for
It
a
would be if it
conditional
was-
use permit.
If I'm changing from wood siding to stucco.
But if it's only 30 years old, it doesn't qualify. Remember, this is the conditional,
Discretionary
the discretionary demolition permit. This is not a regular demolition permit.
So this.
If it's 30 years old, you just go do it.
Yeah, so this
Okay.
document should only be for those 75 years and older.
Okay. That's all this is for then.
Yeah, so then I think we can be explicit about a
Okay.
list of the like for like, or say something like that. That's what I would suggest, but it's not mandatory. Otherwise, you might be confused why you couldn't use the same ones as you.
Chair, if you had specific language to include, I welcome the language, but if you didn't have specific language, if you provide us with the direction, we're happy to make that
Put it
edit,
in
and we present the revised version to the city council.
That's great. That's what I recommend.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I
And-
think that's fine.
To,
And
to propose language that indicates that the materials should be as similar to the materials they're replacing.
I'm going to add it
Yes,
here
similar
as a way
appearance.
for us to
Remember
note
that.
that, yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll steer away from the like for like phrase
Yeah.
because of the
Yeah.
nature of the materials being fundamentally different, but
Yeah.
it's great to indicate the
yeah,
intent.
yeah, like
Yeah.
similar or whatever you need.
As similar in
Yeah.
appearance
Yeah,
as available or
yeah.
something like that.
Okay. Anything else?
Commission's deliberating. I don't have any other questions.
Did we want the commission to consider the certificate of economic hardship standard?
We don't do budgetary items here.
Okay.
That is the city council. That's always,
We'll ask the city council.
In terms of methodology for us making this finding, is it something that the planning commission does support?
absolutely.
Mhm.
I think doing that at a ministerial level so that it's not out in front of the planning commission and on TV forever is a
Right.
very good move.
Yeah.
One of those things I'm surprised we haven't thought about before, if I'm being honest. But yeah,
We don't want
you
to
guys,
see the money.
you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but
Nope.
We don't want to have any.
money is not
No, no,
is
no,
not
no.
what we deal with here.
We don't need people coming on television and in
We
front
gave
of
in and took,
crowds
And
we gave in
crying or
and took
whatever.
sound.
saying I don't have enough money.
We leave money. All right, so any other recommended updates, changes? All right, then I will entertain a motion to, what were those three choices we had?
Approve as amended?
To approve as amended, that's close enough.
I move to approve with amendments
Seconded.
for discretionary demo permit of chapter 17.6, variations in discretion permits, title 17 zoning of Sierra Madre Municipal Code.
And directors, just to confirm, the two amendments you are proposing is striking the language regarding distinct architectural style and to add the like for like language in the ordinance. Okay.
Yes.
Changes only to definitions.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. It will go to the city council by their next meeting. I just really want to thank staff for all the hard work on this. I know that there has been, you have rewritten this code, I think, 7 distinct times. And I truly appreciate all your expertise in that and the department's hard work in that and city attorney's input. And I think that the commission should be pretty proud about turning this code so quickly to the council so that we can get that to them. So I'm really excited about that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commission.
You
Next
crushed
up,
it. You demolished it.
you demolished the demo permits. Next up is approval of the minutes. First, welcome back, Commissioner Moran. I would look for any updates, changes, or edits to the minutes of the May 15th, 2025 Planning Commission. Hearing none, I will look for a motion to approve as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
You have to second.
The May 15th, 2025 minutes.
I wasn't there, so.
I don't know if I was there. I'm
You
just
were.
checking right now.
You
I
were
was
there.
here.
We were
Okay.
waiting for you.
All right, I will second it. Sorry, I was just checking my calendar to make sure that I was seconding.
All those in favor?
I was here for.
Aye.
Hi.
Any abstentions? One abstention. The minutes pass. Next up are the minutes of the August 7th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting minutes.
When I was not.
Any updates, changes anybody would like to see? I will look for a motion to approve as presented.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions? One abstention. Motion carries.
It's finally gone.
Finally gone. Planning Commission reports. Any Planning Commissioner have any reports? Planning and Community Preservation Department reports.
Chair Dennison, for the next meeting, we're contemplating a sign ordinance cleaned up. So if we're able to make it on time, we'll have your review on the sign ordinance.
And that'll be another municipal code text update.
That's correct.
So it would have already been noticed?
No, not yet.
Oh, it'll just be
has
the
not
dis-
been noticed.
Yeah.
It'll just be the discussion about it.
We can start a discussion.
Yeah.
Is that the only item?
That would be the only item for the next meeting.
Okay,
That concludes my report.
thank you. Hearing nothing else, we'll adjourn the meeting to our next regularly scheduled meeting of September 4th. Thank you.
Thank you.